Hey, 42 here. Beneath the city of Antwerp, in the heart of the world-famous diamond district, lies one of the most secure vaults on Earth. Guarded by 10 high-tech security systems in a building that has its own private police force, there's probably nowhere better on planet Earth to stash your valuables. A belief that was shattered at 7 AM on the morning of the 17th of February 2003, when staff at the Diamond Center arrived for work to find the door of this so-called impenetrable safe hanging wide open. Piled high on the floor inside were more than 100 safety deposit boxes. Empty safety deposit boxes. Roughly $500 million worth of loot was stolen, making it by far the biggest diamond heist in history. Even now, 20 years later, questions remain as to exactly how it was done. Somehow, a crack team of thieves bypassed motion detectors, heat sensors, a seismic alarm, dual locking mechanisms, numerous CCTV cameras, a magnetic failsafe, and much, much more to pull off the crime of the century in one of the most heavily guarded buildings in the world. And at least one of them would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for a pesky salami sandwich. This is the mind-blowing story of the Antwerp diamond heist, the most ingenious robbery in history. WTF-Thief for Hire is the first book of a mega series from Anthea Press that reinvents the action genre with a fresh and bold approach. It's a fun blend of James Bond, The Transporter, and Californication that will prove to be an entertaining hit with both male and female audiences. Author Mark Allen Barker has created a book here that the reader doesn't have to work too hard to understand, yet it transports them into someone else's exciting and dangerous world. It's brilliant, fun, clever, and witty escapism literature at its very best, and it's available to purchase on Amazon right now. The link's in the description. The story revolves around two central characters, William Trevor Francis, an unapologetically flawed, smoking and gambling thief for hire, and his equally talented Interpol counterpart, Monique Lefort. I've been loving reading this book, and I genuinely couldn't put it down. I liked that William Trevor Francis is not your typical hero, but you just can't help but root for him because he's just a good guy trying to do the right thing. Like I said, Thief for Hire is a really fun book and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The characters are great, it's clever and witty, the travel across Europe is brilliant, and if you're into fast, non-stop action with a twist, then this book should definitely be on your list. It makes the perfect gift for the holidays, so go ahead and get your copy of WTF-Thief for Hire right now on Amazon. It's available worldwide. You'll find a link in the description below, and a big thanks to Anthea Press for sponsoring this video. The single square mile that makes up the Antwerp Diamond District is one of the most concentrated pockets of wealth in the world. Almost 85% of the world's rough diamonds have passed through this district at one time or another. And between them, the local diamond businesses turn over more than $50 billion per annum. Back in the year 2000, when hardened gem thief Leonardo Notarbartolo rented an office in the Diamond District's most famous building, the Antwerp World Diamond Center, he knew all about the legendary vault hidden in the basement. But despite his storied criminal career, starting from the age of 6, he had no interest whatsoever in actually robbing the place. After all, trying to break into an impenetrable safe is a good way to get yourself arrested, killed, or both. Probably not both. For Notarbartolo, the World Diamond Center was simply a convenient place to sell gemstones he'd stolen in his native Italy. It was a good system, one he had no intention of changing. That is, until the summer of 2001, when he was approached by a shady diamonds dealer with an unusual proposition. This deep-throat type character obviously had deep pockets, because he offered Notarbartolo €100,000 just to give his opinion on whether or not it would be possible to rob the Diamond Center's vault. Notarbartolo accepted on the spot, confident it would be the easiest $100,000 he'd ever made. He already rented a safety deposit box in the Diamond Center's vault and had been down there many times to stash his stolen jewels. Which is why he already knew the answer to the mysterious man's question: could the Diamond Center's vault be robbed? No. No. Multiplied by no, plus no, to the power of 90 no. Still, if Notarbartolo wanted to get paid, he needed to substantiate his stance with something more solid. And so he undertook a little reconnaissance mission. Armed with a sneaky camera pen sticking out of his fancy Italian blazer pocket, he went through the entire process of getting into the vault, snapping covert pictures of all the security systems along the way. And there were quite a lot of them. The entrance to the Diamond Center is protected by metal turnstiles, and access is only granted to those with a valid ID card. Inside, the corridors are patrolled by guards from the building's well-staffed and heavily armed private security force. The vault is buried 2 stories underground and can only be reached by passing through a security checkpoint manned by yet more armed guards. If by some miracle a plucky thief managed to bypass all of that, there would still be the small matter of getting inside the vault itself, a veritable behemoth of reinforced concrete and steel hidden beneath a 3-ton door. A door that's secured by 2 different locking mechanisms, a 4-digit combination lock with 100 million possible codes, and an absolutely bonkers foot-long key designed to be impossible to forge, and a magnetic failsafe that triggers an alarm if the door is opened unexpectedly. Oh yeah, and then there are motion, heat and light sensors inside the vault itself, all of which would be triggered the moment someone stepped inside. Not to mention the fact that all the valuables are locked away inside state-of-the-art safety deposit boxes, each of which requires a unique key and passcode to open. So yeah, it's like the hardest mission for Metal Gear Solid, except I'm pretty sure they don't have a giant killer robot down there. Notarbartolo left the vault after his reconnaissance mission, more convinced than ever that his earlier assessment was absolutely true. Breaking into the Diamond Center vault was completely and utterly impossible. And that's exactly what he told the shady diamond dealer as he shared the images recorded by his spy pen. The man seemed to accept Notarbartolo's conclusion, and for 6 months, that seemed to be the end of it. But then, the man got back in touch out of the blue with an ominous request. He wanted to meet Notarbartolo at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Antwerp. Now, I don't know about you, but if a known criminal who'd recently paid me 100 grand for basically nothing wanted to meet in the middle of nowhere, I'd probably emigrate to Tahiti to live out the rest of my days, masquerading as a cleaning lady called Susan. But Notarbartolo, apparently fashioned from sterner stuff, agreed. At the warehouse, the diamond dealer came clean. He still wanted to break into the vault, and he needed Notarbartolo's help. Then he led him inside, where there was a full-size replica of the vault and antechamber, perfect down to the tiniest detail. Inside the fake vault were 3 Italian men, a crack team of some of the best burglars in Europe. And I can only assume this diamonds dealer was a fan of Guy Ritchie films because they all had really stupid nicknames. First, there was The Genius, a specialist in disabling complex alarm systems. Next was The Monster, a giant of a man who also happens to be a world-class lockpicker and electrician. And finally, there was the King of Keys, an older gentleman who was, if rumours were to be believed, the greatest key forger in the whole of Europe. Later on, Notarbartolo would add one of his childhood friends to the crew, who mostly seems to have been brought on board to help carry the loot. He received the shockingly creative nickname Speedy. But it wasn't just all fake vaults and fancy nicknames. The diamond dealer had a plan. A plan that exploited 2 important observations Notarbartolo had missed 6 months earlier. First, whilst the vault's multi-layered security system appeared impenetrable when viewed as a whole, the individual systems it consisted of were about as secure as a fart in a colander. And second, the entire setup was vulnerable due to a fatal flaw, a classic thermal exhaust port on the Death Star situation. You see, the men in charge of the vault were so convinced it couldn't be cracked that they gotten sloppy. And that sloppiness created certain opportunities. For example, despite being manned by a slick private security force, they all clocked off outside of regular office hours. If the thieves somehow got inside during the weekend, they would have almost 2 full days to carry out the job. By the time Notarbartolo left the warehouse that evening, he was convinced, against all expectations, the unbreakable vault could be broken. But there was plenty of work to be done. Even for our team of professionals, it took 1.5 years to construct a plan that stood any chance of actually working. But by early 2003, they'd set a date. on the 15th of February, they were going in. The day before, Notarbartolo paid a final visit to the vault, armed with, of all things, a can of woman's hairspray. Once inside, he waited till nobody was looking, then sneakily sprayed a thin layer of the stuff on the wall in one particular part of the vault. You'll see why in a minute. That night, the crew held a slightly less virtuous version of the Last Supper. Being Italians, they paid a visit to the local deli, where they ordered salami and Italian bread to make what I can only assume were absolutely bloody amazing sandwiches. Criminals or not, Italians don't mess around when it comes to food. Unfortunately for one of them, that one taste of home would directly lead to a prison sentence. But I'm guessing ahead of myself. Late the following night, Notarbartolo dropped the crew off just outside the Diamond District. He was to be the getaway driver, but if all went to plan, there would be no need for high-speed chases. The first item on the crew's very long to-do list for the weekend was to get inside the World Diamond Center. The front entrance was an absolute no-go. It was locked down with steel shutters and covered from all angles with CCTV. Instead, as planned, the King of Keys picked the lock of a nearby empty office building, which gave them access to a courtyard that backed onto the Diamond Center. From there, they used a ladder to climb up to a smaller terrace on the center's second floor. But there was a small problem. The terrace was protected by an infrared sensor that would trigger the moment it detected a heat signature bigger than a pigeon. It was a high-tech piece of kit, but the genius defeated it with a laughably low-tech hack. He went up the ladder first, approaching the sensor whilst holding a large shield made of polystyrene, the same stuff we make cheap disposable coffee cups out of. It's an excellent thermal insulator, and the shield completely blinded the sensor to the genius's presence. Once he was close enough, he simply propped the shield up in front of the sensor and beckoned the rest of the team up. He then made short work of an alarm protecting the window, and they were in. As expected, the entire building was deserted, so the thieves strolled down the emergency stairs and into the vault antechamber, completely unopposed. The antechamber was flush with CCTV, but once again the security team had been sloppy. They turned the lights out, meaning the cameras were effectively blind. Thanks to Notarbartolo's reconnaissance work, the crew knew exactly where all the cameras were. So they slipped thick black bin bags over each one of them, then turned the lights on. If anyone happened to be monitoring the footage, they would never know anything was amiss. So far, the plan had gone off without a hitch, but now came the hard part. Getting into the vault itself. So, any ideas how they did it? If you're expecting the monster to bust out the power tools, you're dead wrong. Because not only was the door protected by two separate locking mechanisms and a magnetic failsafe, the entire vault was also rigged up to a seismic alarm that would trigger as soon as it detected significant vibrations. So brute forcing it was just out of the question. And if they couldn't break into the vault, that really left one option. They were going to have to open it the old-fashioned way. At some point during the months leading up to the heist, Notarbartolo had somehow managed to hide a tiny video camera above the vault door, positioned in the perfect spot to record the guards as they opened the safe each morning. Not only did that give him the 4-digit code for the combination lock, it also gave him high-resolution video footage of the impossible-to-forge foot-long key. Or should I say, the impossible-to-forge unless you're called the King of Keys foot-long key. The whole operation should have hinged on whether or not the King of Keys had actually pulled it off. But once again, it turns out the guards had been sloppy, because in a small room near the safe, the crew found the original key just hanging on a random hook. So, both locks were open. The final hurdle that needed vaulting before they got inside was the magnetic failsafe, which consisted of two metal plates, one on the door of the vault and the other on the frame. Move these plates just a few millimeters out of alignment, and an alarm would sound. It was a high-tech mechanism, but once again, it was defeated by a ridiculously low-tech workaround. The alarm itself wasn't built into the vault. It was a separate module that had been bolted on, so the thieves just unbolted it. With the locks open and the alarm disabled, the thieves were finally able to get inside the vault. But here's where things got a little hairy. Remember, there were 3 different kinds of sensors in there: light, heat, and motion. The first of those was easy. The gang just turned the lights back off before they went inside and stuck a piece of tape over the sensor. But heat and motion? Just by stepping inside the vault and breathing a bit, they would surely trigger both. But here's where Notarbartolo's sneaky kind of hairspray came to the rescue. The heat and motion sensors were actually a single unit that would only be triggered if both movement and a rise in ambient temperature were detected simultaneously. By spraying the sensor with an oil-based aerosol, Notarbartolo had created a tiny insulating layer between the air of the vault and the sensor, preventing it from accurately measuring the ambient temperature. It wasn't a perfect system. Hairspray or not, sooner or later all those sweaty Italians would increase the temperature enough to trigger the alarm, but it was enough to give them the time they needed if they acted fast. Luckily, the team had rehearsed this next bit hundreds of times in the replica vault, and they knew exactly what to do. Working in pitch darkness, the monster took exactly 12 steps forward, and then reached up and removed a single ceiling panel right in the center of the vault. Inside was part of the wiring system for the sensors. As he had 100 times before in the replica, the monster quickly installed a loop in the system, tricking the sensors into thinking the safe was empty. And with that, every single one of the vault's safety features was now properly disabled, broken, or unlocked. They were in. Well, almost. There was still a minor inconvenience that every single valuable item in the entire vault was locked inside a high-tech safety deposit box. But of course, our band of merry salami-loving thieves were well prepared for that. In fact, since they knew the exact make and model of the boxes, they'd gone to the trouble of designing a custom-made tool to crack them open. For the next few hours, that's exactly what the King of Keys did. He'd broken into more than 120 of the 160 safety deposit boxes before the gang realized they were swimming in so much loot, they'd never be able to get it all out. And that meant it was time to go. In the early hours of Sunday morning, the now heavily laden thieves snuck back out the way they'd come, stopping by the Diamond Center security hub to steal the CCTV tapes from the central recording system. They then threw the loot in Notarbartolo's car and got the hell out of there. They still had a good 24 hours or so until anyone would realize what had happened, and they planned to use that time for two purposes. One, to get as far away from Antwerp as possible, and two, to dispose of several bin bags full of highly incriminating evidence they'd accumulated during the planning and execution of the heist. That last part fell to Notarbartolo and his old mate Speedy, who were already on their way to Turin. But it was about at this time that things started to go wrong. Or to be more precise, it was about at this time that Speedy went wrong. He was a nervy character at the best of times, and apparently he wasn't adjusting well to his new role as one of the most wanted men in Europe. The original plan had been to stop and burn the evidence somewhere in France, but Speedy was having none of it. He wanted to get rid of anything that could link them to the crime scene as soon as possible. And so, before they'd even made it to Brussels, they pulled off the motorway and into some woods to get the job done. Trouble was, by this point, Speedy was having a full-blown nervous breakdown. So, instead of systematically burning the contents of the bag, as planned, he ran off into the woods like a character from the Blair Witch Project, flinging the contents of the bags all over the place. By the time Notarbartolo caught up with him, it was too late. The evidence was scattered so far and wide that there was simply no chance of gathering it all up again. Not that Notarbartolo was overly worried. They were in a nondescript tract of forest off a motorway in the middle of nowhere. It would be months, perhaps even years, before anyone came through that way again, and by that time the evidence would have been consumed by the elements. Unfortunately for him, that assessment turned out to be wildly optimistic, because it was barely more than 12 hours before someone stumbled across Speedy's handiwork, and fewer than 24 before the police were combing through it. It was the beginning of the end. In amongst the litter were dozens of envelopes stamped with the words Antwerp Diamond Center. There was also a receipt with Notarbartolo's name on for a not at all suspicious sounding miniature low-light surveillance camera, and a business card belonging to a well-known criminal with a knack for alarms. Elio Denorio, aka The Genius. And the last piece of incriminating evidence was a half-eaten salami sandwich. Maybe it wasn't that amazing after all. And when the police showed up at Notarbartolo's flat in Antwerp, they found a receipt for exactly that sandwich in one of the cupboards. Like most receipts, this one included both the name of the deli it was from and the timestamp. All the police had to do was request the shop's CCTV footage at that particular time, and they got themselves their first look at Ferdinando Finotto, aka the Monster. As the evidence mounted, one by one those involved were arrested. Well, all except for the King of Keys. He was never caught, and is presumably right now swimming in a bathtub full of Grey Goose vodka and prostitutes on his private island in the South Pacific. Despite the magnitude of their crime, most of those involved received relatively short sentences. The Genius, the Monster, and Speedy each got 5 years for their troubles, though all 3 of them were released long before their time was up. Notarbartolo got a slightly more reasonable sounding 10 years, but he was released on parole after 4. To this day, almost none of the stolen goods have been recovered. As for the mysterious diamond dealer who set the whole thing up, like the King of Keys, he was never caught. In fact, people believe he never even existed, and that either Notarbartolo was the criminal mastermind all along, or that perhaps he made the diamonds dealer up to conceal the identity of someone else. The most popular theory is that it may have been his cousin, Benedetto Capizzi, a senior figure in the Italian mafia, but in all likelihood, we'll never know for sure. It goes without saying that stealing millions of dollars from other people is morally suboptimal, but it's hard not to admire the sheer ingenuity of the thieves who pulled off the Antwerp diamond heist. And whilst it was an unambiguously evil act perpetrated by some highly questionable characters, when you think about it, there's actually quite a powerful lesson here. If in life you ever happen to be faced with a seemingly insurmountable challenge, don't give up. Break the problem down into smaller, more manageable chunks and keep on trying, no matter how hard it seems and no matter the odds. And you never know, you might even end up becoming a millionaire. Just stay away from the salami. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.